Welcome in to another episode of the Barnes on Bama podcast. I'm your host, Owen Barnes, and we have a ton to discuss. Just want to thank everyone who is a new subscriber to the channel. As always, all of the support really does help me out. I know about 75% of the people that watch these are not subscribed, so if you do enjoy the content, if you would drop me a follow here on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts, it really does help me out. I have some questions that I want to kind of ask up here at the top of the show, so if you'll throw your answers down in the comments, I am very curious. If you may have noticed that I used to upload all of my episodes at 9 a.m. the day that I was going to post them. I have started trying to post some in the afternoon. I asked some questions regarding the Liberian Phylon news. I know it came out and I had recorded and had it ready. So I posted it later and it seemed to do really well. I posted my last one and I'm trying this one later on in the afternoon as well. I'm curious on to what you guys' thoughts are. Do y'all like that when I posted in the afternoon? Do you prefer when I posted in the morning? Open to hear what people's opinions are as it relates to that. Additionally, any other questions, comments, concerns as it relates to the episodes, please let me know down in the bottom. Like I said, I'm always looking to try to do whatever the people want. As always, as I've previously mentioned, I do have some other guests that I will be bringing on. Didn't line up for it to work out this week, but I do plan to try to have a guest on next week and may see if I can have one on each week kind of for the rest of the summer. We do have a few things that I want to talk about here at the top of the show before we get into the main content. One of them is actually very sad news. And this very incredibly sad news that I guess have to semi-report. If you've been online, you may have seen this. But Alabama quarterback and, freshman coming in, Keelan Russell, unfortunately his sister passed away, his twin sister passed away, Kirsten Russell. The details surrounding what happened have not come out. Obviously their family is absolutely in our thoughts and prayers. I'm very, I hope that Keelan has the support system that he needs, whether it be around his family, around the staff. I know that all the guys are going to rally around him, but that's obviously a very devastating news. Not just the fact that it's his sister, but it was his twin sister. They graduated just a couple of weeks ago. There's some videos that were floating around the internet of them cutting up and dancing when they walked across the stage at Duncanville. I'm really hoping that he has that support staff that he needs around him, because this is going to be a very difficult time losing a loved one as well as somebody that I'm sure he's grown up very, close to, with them being twin and, graduating and going through life together. So this is going to be a very difficult time for him. I hope that he gets all the help that he needs. On a slightly different note, the other thing that I wanted to talk about before we get into the other position breakdown. So if you missed my last episode we talked about the defensive backs. This episode we're going to talk about linebackers and defensive line. But before we talk about that, there's one thing that I wanted to talk about, and I wanted to kind of bring this up as a major topic as well. And I don't know if you may have seen, but Ryan Williams went on John Gruden's podcast, John Gruden's show. First off, if you hadn't seen John Gruden's video that he posted where Nate Oates sent him a bunch of swag, it was super cool. He posted it over on Instagram and Twitter. Really, really cool to watch. I really recommend it. I'm pretty sure I retweeted it. I thought there were some really cool polos and different things that were kind of posted. And obviously having a guy like John Gruden that's very well known, well followed, shouting out your coach, talking about Wimp Sanderson, talking about how well you're doing as a program. That's just publicity that helps and eyeballs that helps your team. But Ryan Williams went on the show with John Gruden and was asked about the loss to Vanderbilt. And Ryan Williams was originally like, hey, Vanderbilt came out, they were more prepared, they were just a better team. And John Gruden asked him regarding next season, what's kind of the team's mindset going into that? And Ryan made the comment that it's going to be like killing an ant with a sledgehammer. So I guess the question becomes, I want to field it to everyone. Do you like the mindset? Obviously, I think that the killer mentality, that type of mindset of like, we're going to crush whatever comes towards us, is a great mindset to have. So I'm okay with the mindset, but the question becomes, are you okay with that being put out? And the reason I say that is, this is a perfect example of why Nick Saban, was very specific with the media, with what he said, what he allowed players to say, what he allowed coaches to say, and who he even allowed to speak to the media, right? He famously didn't allow his assistant coaches or freshmen to speak to the media, and was very reserved on what they said. Even, very famously, we had the defensive lineman. My mind is completely going blank. Defensive lineman for the Philadelphia Eagles, was asked regarding what he think about a certain team. Went to say something, immediately paused, and nope, not going to say it. Right? That was Nick Saban, him knowing hey, I can't say what I'm actually thinking, because Nick Saban was very particular on exactly what you could say to the media and what you could not. Right? And because he didn't want to give a team bulletin board material. The same way with when you celebrate with your teammates. You don't celebrate, putting it in people's faces, going in there. That's just not the kind of person you are, because it's all about perception with the opposing team, not just with your team, right? You wanted to make sure that you didn't give somebody bulletin board material, that you obviously did your best, and that you made it about the game and not about whatever you said. So my question kind of becomes, do you like what Ryan Williams said? I think that the mentality is okay, but, what are your thoughts about putting it out in the media? Diego Pavia has already responded, with some song lyrics, and it seems like he's like, oh, we're just going to brush it off our back kind of thing. We're not worried about them. So obviously a little bit of trash talk going on kind of in advance of the, pseudo rematch for this upcoming season. Obviously we will break down that game in a ton more detail when that rolls around. But obviously this is, some kind of off-season news that has stirred up a lot of question, right? A lot of talk about, do you like Ryan Williams' comments? Like I said, I personally like the mentality, but I don't know that I love the comments. Like I said, I like the mentality. I like that that's the intensity that the team is taking into a game like that. But I do think that there is some possible issues with saying something like that out loud on a national podcast, on a video that's going to be seen by the opposing team. That is bulletin board material, right? That's no different. And I know the Cover Crimson guys talked about it, but that's no different in a degree of what Nick Saban said last year, right? The difference is when with what Nick Saban said last year about the lack of home field advantage, that was a factual statement, right? Nick Saban was saying, hey, they don't have a ton of home field advantage because they don't, right? Even though Alabama lost that game, Alabama had more fans in Nashville than Vanderbilt did. So what Saban was saying was a factual statement. Now, did Vanderbilt still use it as bulletin board material? Sure. But, what Saban was saying was purely factual. What Ryan Williams saying is much more of a trash talk mentality, right? So I agree with the Cover Crimson guys and what they said from that standpoint. But the question becomes, does it really matter, right? Does it matter that one was factual and one wasn't? Because I think they're being taken in the same way from the opposing fan base, from the opposing team of hey, we're going to use this as a way to prove that we belong. And, if you're going to call us an ant that you're going to crush with a sledgehammer, we're going to show you. So I am very curious on everyone's thoughts on that. Like I said, I really like the mentality from the team. I don't know that I love it being kind of portrayed as hey, this is what we think of the opposing team, but I definitely like the mentality, and I'm very curious to see, does that come to fruition? Does Alabama not just talk the talk, but do they walk the walk? Because that is inevitably, that's what's going to happen this season, is you're going to have to prove that's the mentality you have from an offense and a defensive perspective. So those are the two smaller stories I wanted to talk about. Obviously, really, really, praying for Keelan's family and, everything surrounding that horrible situation. And then wanted to obviously talk about Ryan's comments that he made on Gruden's podcast. So now we're going to shift over, to talking about the linebackers first, and then we will do the defensive line to round it out. So first things first, we've got our linebackers. And as I mentioned, this is, our positional breakdowns that we have done over the last 2 episodes now, and I'm going to do this for every position on the team, offense and defense. And this is really just what my thoughts are. Are there any holes that we need to fill from last season? What are my overall thoughts about the position? Is there anybody that, hey, this is somebody you need to look out for? This is not projecting, hey, I expect somebody to have X number of sacks. I expect, I'm not trying to predict specific numbers. For any of the depth chart stuff, I'm going to refer over to the Cover Crimson ones that have been put out by Clint Lamb and others. So that's the one that I'm going to reference when I'm talking depth chart. Actually, when you're talking linebackers and defensive line, these are pretty set in stone because, as we will talk about here soon, there's really only one guy that was a starter that you're replacing. That played substantial minutes. You could consider two if you're talking Q Robinson as well, but really you're only replacing one guy from last season in Jahad Campbell that was an everyday starter. Obviously Tim Smith on the defensive line as well, but so you're replacing one defensive tackle, one linebacker, but these are pretty set in stone as to who I expect the day one starters to be. Obviously, rotational and how much people in the rotation play, that's something that's definitely going to be up for determination. But I do think the starters this season are going to be pretty set in stone. So when you're talking the linebacking core for this upcoming season, I think that the big question becomes replacing Jahad Campbell, right? We just mentioned Jahad Campbell. He has to be the name that you think about when you think about last season's Alabama team and the defense. He anchored the defense. Last season, Alabama had one player with over 76 tackles. So Deontay Lawson had 76 tackles. The highest tackle rate or tackles on the team was 119. So Jahad Campbell had 43 more tackles than the next highest person on the entire team. Then when you look at from a tackles per loss perspective, the top two guys were Jahad Campbell at 11.5 and then Tim Keenan, which we'll talk about in a little bit, on the defensive line at 7.5. So he had about 4 more tackles for loss than the next best guy on the team. And then he also led the team in sacks. He had 5 sacks, whereas Q Robinson had 4. And then the next highest returner was Tim Keenan with 2.5, right? So that's another place that we'll kind of look at here kind of moving forward. The big thing is Alabama did bring in an elite transfer at this position. And it is somebody that led Colorado last season. He led them in tackles and he was second on their team in tackles with 82 tackles last season, and then was second on their team in tackles for loss at 11.5. So actually the same number of tackles per loss that Jahad Campbell had last season and Nakai Hill-Green. He's a guy that I expect to move into an immediate day one starter, right? Like you brought him in to replace Jahad Campbell. He is a day one starter. He is the guy that you hope to have anchor your defense. That's why you bring in somebody like that. That's why you bring in somebody with that level of experience, that amount of, how well he did from a tackles perspective, from a tackles per loss. I think he perfectly is going to slide into that Jahad Campbell position. Now, will he be able to have the amount of success that Jahad Campbell had and, be a first-round pick? That we will see what happens, as he kind of plays out. I think that he definitely has that potential, but I think that obviously when you're replacing a first-round pick, you can't just guarantee that the next guy is going to immediately be a first-round pick. Obviously, that's the goal. That's why you bring in somebody like that, but you just will not know until you absolutely get him in the position, have him playing games, and see what he actually looks like on the field, see his actual game speed and everything of the sort, right? I think Nakai Hill-Green is going to be really, really good, but I am curious to see kind of how he shapes for the rest of the defense. So obviously, for those of you unaware, Alabama plays a 4-2-5 defense now, mostly with Kane Womack. So, we are generally only going to have 2 linebackers standing. 3 linebackers, however, get massive play, so to speak, in our general team. So like last season, our top 3 tackle guys were Jahad Campbell at 119, Deontay Lawson at 76, and then Justin Jefferson at 61. Deontay Lawson is a guy, obviously, who returns from last season. He is coming back to the team and is somebody that I think will have a solid a year, obviously coming back from injury. He's somebody that, like, obviously really, really glad that he's able to come back. When you look at bringing back this defense and why I think the defense is going to be so good, and we talked about it last episode, but part of the reason why I think this defense is going to be so good is the amount of returners that you have just across the board, right? Not saying you didn't replace people, right? You replaced a defensive tackle, you replaced a linebacker, you replaced a safety. So you replaced a guy at each level of the defense. However, at every other position, you have multi-year starters. You've brought in really good transfers. You've got really good recruiting. And you've got people that have played substantial minutes, substantial snaps, substantial games that can slide just right into that role. Then, additionally, we originally thought we were going to have to replace, if we have three main linebackers, even though we play a 4-2-5, obviously you have that third linebacker for any time you're in a three linebacker set, or, swapping people out or whatever. We thought we would be replacing that third linebacker. But with the Diego Pavia news, and actually that is one correction I have from last episode, I made the comment that Vanderbilt did not have a starting quarterback completely spaced on the NCAA ruling regarding, or the law ruling regarding the JUCO transfer. So Pavia is going to be back for this season. I know I mentioned it with the Ryan Williams news, but wanted to issue a slight correction there. But with that same ruling, Justin Jefferson, that also played in the JUCO, gets an extra season. So Justin Jefferson, that we talked about, that had 61 tackles last season, he also gets to come back and play for Alabama football. So again, when you're looking at who we're replacing from that linebacker core, Alabama has Nakai Hill-Green that you bring in from Colorado to replace Jihad Campbell. You've got Justin Jefferson that comes in as a redshirt senior. You got Deontay Lawson coming back as a redshirt senior. Then you have a lot of freshmen, right? Freshmen and sophomores. You've got QB Reese, Caden Jones, Luke Metz, Duke Johnson, Abdul Sanders. Quite a few guys that, we don't expect to see the field, but a lot of solid talent and recruits and stuff behind those elite guys. Those are names you're going to hear next season, probably mixed in potentially with some other transfers and stuff. But like this season, from a starting linebacking core, right? If we can stay healthy, right? Obviously, we need to stay healthy. But if you can stay healthy, a big three linebacking core, Alabama absolutely is set with some very, very, very good talent. And I think that we will be in a really good position from a linebacking standpoint this season. I think a lot of it will hinge on how good Nakai Hill-Green does in our system. Obviously, replacing Jihad Campbell. Jihad Campbell was a perfect fit for the system. So that becomes a little bit of a question, is how good does Hill-Green do? However, if he does what you expect him to be capable of, right? Or even just does what he did last season. If he did what he did last season, take Jihad Campbell off the team, he's still number one in tackles on our team. He's still number one in tackles for loss on our team just with last season's stats. That's not even having, our defense funneling to the linebacker, or, the different things that we may potentially try to do with him based on his skill set and with what Womack's defense wants to try to do, right? So I do really have a lot of high hopes when we're talking about this linebacking core. We're talking about how successful Alabama's linebackers can be this season. Like I said, does it hinge partially on the transfer? Sure. But I do think that Alabama will have a ton of success in the linebacking core this season. And it is a position, when I look at the defense, that I am very happy with what we have. Like I said, need to stay healthy because I don't think that we're as deep, right? We have three guys that, playing with tons and tons and tons of experience. So we will be one of the more experienced linebacking cores that in the entire country with, two redshirt seniors and a grad transfer, right? You're going to have an extremely old, extremely knowledgeable linebacking core. Obviously, with the youth behind them, that's going to be, as long as you can stay healthy, that's not a problem. But that is a place that you are going to definitely need to stay healthy. So next we'll shift over to the defensive line. And with the defensive line, I'm including some of the hand in the dirt linebacker, edge hybrids in this. So I'm including the Wolf and Bandit positions for Alabama. Officially, Alabama has like Bandit, Wolf, a nose tackle, and a defensive tackle. But I'm going to include all those when I'm talking defensive line. So, again, referencing the Cover Crimson depth chart that they came out with, these are starters that, started a ton of time last season. You got guys like Quay Rusall, LT Overton, Tim Keenan, and then the one change would be instead of Tim Smith, you have James Smith sliding into the starting defensive tackle. Those four names all played substantial minutes last season. James Smith, obviously the only non-starter in that list that I just mentioned. Again, guys that have a ton of experience behind them. You have guys like Jamarian Latham, obviously a ton of experience behind them. Yanze Pierre, Noah Carter, Jordan Renaud, Jeremiah Beeman, Edric Hill. Then you have a transfer in Kelby Collins. He's kind of a little bit of an X factor. The potential becomes like what role, how good is he going to be in his role, and what kind of role Alabama sees him in. Is he, good enough to play his way into more of a starting, or not starting, but substantial minutes? What does he bring to the table? He's a transfer from Florida. So that becomes when you're talking about this defensive line, right? The big thing that when you're, in my mind, when you're talking about the defensive line, and something that Alabama did not have a ton of success with last season, was getting to the quarterback. Alabama got to the quarterback okay. We had 25 sacks, but when you compare that we had 25 sacks and our opponents had 24 sacks against us, that just, for the fact that we had a mobile quarterback, us having 24 sacks is kind of low. I feel like if you have, even though Alabama's defense or offensive line last season, really only had a couple of games that had major issues, I think that the fact that we only got 25 sacks from a defense definitely scares me a little bit. When I look at the bigger thing that scares me about that is when you look at where the sacks came from, right? Last season, the sacks came from Jahad Campbell and Q Robinson. Now, that's okay, because if your thought process is the way that Kane Wommack's defense is, the defensive line helps just funnel it to the linebackers, and it's more of the linebackers get the sacks and the defensive linemen do more of the dirty work. And, because there was a lot of talk last season about like LT Overton. The LT Overton officially only finished with 2 sacks, but he had a ton of hurries, and he had a ton of situations where he just couldn't finish the play, right? So, all it takes is a couple of breaks, and now he has 5 or 6 sacks, and the numbers don't look the same. I'm okay with that thought process. I'm also okay with the thought process that because you're replacing Jahad Campbell and Q Robinson with an Akai Hill-Green and Justin Jefferson, or whoever else is going to replace, well, really from Q, you've got Quay Rusall, or whoever's going to, you think is going to slide into that specific position. I'm okay with that thought process, right? I'm okay with the thought process that we have guys that will slide into those positions. However, you still are losing 11 sacks from last season. And that's from James Smith, Q Robinson, and Jahad Campbell, right? So you have a decent amount of sacks from last season that you are losing. And the question for me when it comes to the defensive line, I think that in general, our defensive line did okay. I think that Alabama's defensive line needs to do a little bit better job stopping the run against teams like a Vanderbilt or against an Oklahoma. I think that Vanderbilt was the bigger one that was the problem. Obviously, we talked at length about the issues with that game last episode, and about how definitely changes were made after that game. So I don't want to completely judge the whole thing off of that one game, but even look at like the South Florida game. I think that there were moments in the South Florida game, in the Vanderbilt game, in the Oklahoma game, that the defensive line and that our ability to stop the run, and this isn't just the defensive line, this is also the linebackers, but our ability to stop the run definitely hindered our ability to get off the field. And because of that, like, this is a position, this defensive line is a spot where I really just would like to see additional growth from these guys. I know that we have the guys who are going to have a ton of experience. And I think when you're talking about going from year 1 to year 2 in a system, I think that you're going to have a fairly large jump, because last season it was a lot of Kane Womack implementing the defense and a lot of, we're moving from Nick Saban's defense to Kane Womack's defense, which was very different. And some of the philosophies and some of the play calls, you could only make certain play calls because you're only at, this level of the defense. Similar to when we talk about the offense, right? You're only at a certain base level of the defense or offense because of implementation and, just being a first-year guy in the system. Now you have a full offseason, a full season, now another full offseason, and everybody outside of Kelby Collins that is on your main starting depth chart for the defensive tackles, defensive ends positions are guys that have been in the system the whole time. Kelby Collins, Justin Hill, Landon Simmons, again, off of the depth chart that they have, are the only guys, and these are 3 to 4 guys down the depth chart. So this is not your starters, not even your second line guys. But these are the guys who have not played a full season, full off season with Kane Womack. The benefit that I see with that is Kane Womack now has the ability to obviously show what went wrong last season in certain games, etc., and can just point to that of like, hey, this is what we did wrong, this is what we have to fix to do better, right? And I think that his ability to actually have a full extra offseason, having implemented the defense, I think that that's going to speak volumes into how much more Alabama is going to be able to do on defense, whether it be from scheme, whether it be from personnel, right, changing things around a little more. And again, the fact that when we're talking about the returners on defense, the fact that you have so many returners on defense, 8 returners on defense, and 69% of the returning production from the defense returning for this season, it is hard to overstate how good that is for Alabama moving forward for this season, right? Like I said, I'm doing the position by position and what my thoughts are on some of the starters and, who we're having to replace, etc. And like I said, I think the spot about this specific spot is, my biggest concern is the pass rush. I would like to see guys like Overton get into the ball carrier a little better. I'm very curious to see what like a full Quay Russaw, obviously got 2.5 sacks his freshman year last year. 2.5 tackles for loss. His freshman year last year with 1 sack. So him being a redshirt sophomore, very curious to see what he looks like in a starting position. What Latham looks like with an extra year, what Pierre may look like with an extra year. The fact that we had some younger guys that were in some of those edge rush positions, potentially like a Keon Keeley. We've heard a lot about him, like what happens when he potentially, sees the field in significant minutes and significant snaps. That's really the spot where I have the biggest questions is related to the pass rush. Like I said, I think that the run game is a thing that I think Alabama had some issues with at times last season, but I do think it cleaned up. I just want to see that continuous and continue to get better. But the pass rush is the real spot. And like I said, if the answer becomes that the pass rush is going to be very similar, Quay Russaw is going to step into the Q Robinson role, and then you're going to have some of your sacks being done by Nakai Hill-Green or Deontay Lawson from that linebacker position on a blitz or something. Okay, I'm okay with that. But I just need to see where the pass rush is going to come from. I think that our defensive backs, as we talked about last episode, are going to be very good. So I'm not concerned that we have to be getting the, quarterback immediately. But this league has really good receivers. This league has, is going to have good quarterback play, even if we don't know who those quarterbacks are. they're going to be able to make plays. The receivers are going to be able to make plays. And so being able to get to the quarterback is something you're absolutely going to have to be able to do. And that's the one spot when we look at who we lost from last season and some of the unknowns for this season. Like I said, I think that we have the ability. There's just some unknowns, some question marks. That's the thing that I think concerns me the most when I'm thinking about this line. So that is what I wanted to talk about. Like I said, I know this is a little bit different. We're talking about football. Like I said, I do plan to bring on some people next episode. Basketball practices also officially started with some camps earlier this week. So we can talk about that next week after some details kind of start trickling out. I've heard a couple of things, but we'll save that for next week. We'll talk about some stuff, like I said, after more details and more practices have happened and we hear some more things coming out of who may be really good, and we can kind of talk about, is there anything shifting based on our thoughts, as it relates to rotation and extra minutes, etc. So we will talk about all that later, but thank you so much, everyone, for supporting these episodes as it relates to the football content. I do plan to keep up the 2 episodes a week. If I have a chance, I may try to go to 3 episodes a week when I'm putting out the content with somebody else. May try to do 2 episodes by myself and 1 with a guest. We'll just have to see how my schedule permits. But at minimum, I will commit to the 2 episodes a week throughout the entire offseason. So please subscribe to the channel if you do appreciate these. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I really do appreciate it. And I will catch you in the next episode. Peace.